The year was 2002. In the small southern town of Pine Ridge, Alabama, it was the kind of place where everyone claimed to know everyone else, where football games and Sunday church services formed the center of community life. But beneath that surface of small-town charm ran deep fault lines of racial tension, cracks that widened whenever crime struck. For 16-year-old Marcus Hill, those cracks would swallow him whole. Marcus was a lanky teenager with a shy smile, an honor roll student who loved drawing superheroes and playing pickup basketball with his friends. He dreamed of being the first in his family to go to college, studying architecture so he could design homes better than the one he grew up in. His mother, Vanessa, worked long hours as a nurse's aide to provide for Marcus and his younger sister, Destiny, but one October night changed everything. On the evening of October 17, 2002, a corner store in Pine Ridge was robbed. The clerk, a white man named Leonard Davis, reported that a masked gunman demanded cash and fled with just over $200. Davis told police the suspect was a black male, medium build, maybe around 16 to 20 years old. No fingerprints were recovered, no DNA. The security camera had been broken for months, but in Pine Ridge, that vague description was all it took to set off a manhunt, not for the person who committed the crime, but for a scapegoat who fit the image. Within 48 hours, police showed up at Marcus Hill's school. They pulled him from class in front of his peers, handcuffed him, and shoved him into the back of a cruiser. His crime? Like the suspect, he was black. He was young, and he lived just a few blocks from the store. Marcus pleaded with officers, saying he'd been at home that night, working on a history project with his cousin, Jamal. But the police didn't care. They had their suspect at the station. Things grew worse. Detectives questioned Marcus for nearly 12 hours, straight without a lawyer, without his mother, without a break. They told him if he confessed, he'd get to go home. They told him if he didn't, he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. Terrified, exhausted, and only 16 years old, Marcus broke down. He didn't confess outright, but when officers fed him details of the crime, he nodded along. They wrote up a statement claiming he had admitted his involvement. By the time his mother arrived, it was too late. Marcus was charged as an adult with armed robbery and assault. His mother scraped together what little money she could to hire an attorney, but it wasn't enough. Marcus was assigned a public defender, a man juggling more than 200 cases. He met Marcus only twice before trial. Each time, he urged the teenager to take a plea deal. 15 years is better than life, he said, but Marcus refused. He hadn't done anything he wanted. His day in court, the trial began in April 2003. There was no physical evidence connecting Marcus to the robbery. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon recovered. The state's entire case hinged on two things: the store clerk's uncertain identification and Marcus's coerced statement. The clerk, Leonard Davis, admitted on the stand that the robber had been masked and the encounter lasted less than 2 minutes. Still, prosecutors pushed him to identify Marcus in the courtroom. Nervously, Davis pointed toward the defense table. "I think that's him," he said. As for the so-called confession, Marcus testified that officers pressured him, that he was scared and confused. His cousin Jamal took the stand and swore Marcus had been at his house the night of the robbery. But the jury, made up of 11 white residents and 1 black alternate, seemed unmoved. It took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. Marcus Hill, just 16 years old, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The courtroom gasped. His mother sobbed uncontrollably, begging the judge for mercy. But the gavel had already fallen. Marcus was led away in shackles, his future stolen before it had a chance to begin. Prison was a brutal awakening. Marcus, barely old enough to drive, was thrown into a world of hardened men twice his age. He learned quickly to keep his head down, to move cautiously, to never show fear. Still, he couldn't escape the violence. Fights broke out constantly. Guards looked the other way. For years, Marcus carried scars, both physical and invisible. He missed high school graduation. He missed his sister's birthdays, his mother's tears at family gatherings. He watched his friends' lives move forward while his own stood frozen. Letters became his only connection to the outside world, his mother's steady words of faith, his sister's updates about school. But as the years dragged on, even those letters grew less frequent. Still, Marcus clung to hope. He spent hours in the prison law library, teaching himself about wrongful convictions, appeals, and civil rights. He wrote to innocence projects, legal aid groups, anyone who might take his case. For a long time, no one responded. Then, in 2014, after Marcus had spent more than a decade behind bars, his letter landed on the desk of attorney Rachel Kim, a young lawyer with the Southern Justice Initiative. She read his file and was struck immediately by the lack of evidence. She agreed to take the case. Rachel's team uncovered glaring problems with Marcus's conviction. His so-called confession had been extracted illegally, without a parent or attorney present. The eyewitness identification was shaky at best, influenced by leading questions from prosecutors. Jamal's alibi testimony had never been properly considered. Most importantly, they discovered that 2 other robberies had occurred in neighboring towns with an almost identical pattern. Another suspect, a 21-year-old man named Anthony Rogers, had eventually been arrested for those crimes. Rogers bore a striking resemblance to Marcus, same build, same hairstyle at the time, and Rogers had admitted to a robbery in Pine Ridge during a plea deal, but prosecutors had never connected that confession to Marcus's case. Armed with this evidence, Rachel filed for a new trial. The battle dragged on for years, with the state resisting at every step. Prosecutors argued that overturning Marcus's conviction would undermine community trust in the justice system. Judges hesitated, wary of admitting error. Finally, in 2018, after 16 years behind bars, Marcus's conviction was vacated. He was released from prison at the age of 32, but freedom felt bittersweet. Marcus stepped into a world he barely recognized. Cell phones, social media, self-checkout lines. Everything had changed while he was locked away. His sister, Destiny, was grown with children of her own. His mother's hair had gone gray. He was free, but he could never get back the years he lost. Marcus struggled to find work. Employers turned him away, skeptical of the gap in his history. He lived in halfway houses, sometimes sleeping on friends' couches. The state offered no compensation, no apology. They simply opened the prison gates and let him walk away. Still, Marcus refused to give up. He began speaking publicly about juvenile justice, sharing his story at schools and community events. He wanted people to understand the dangers of racial bias, the ease with which a teenager's life could be stolen by a system built on fear and prejudice. He reminded audiences that children, especially black children, were too often treated as adults in the eyes of the law, stripped of innocence, denied protection, and condemned before they had a chance to grow. Marcus never became the architect he dreamed of being, but he built something else, a voice that demanded change, a story that refused to be silenced. He was only 16 when bias stole his future, and though he walks free today, the boy he once was remains behind bars forever.